This tank is in desperate need of a refresh. For well over a year it acted as the main community tank, but since then the fish have moved on and it's become somewhat neglected. While it is perfectly viable as a tank, I think this is a chance to do something better. Currently the only occupants are 4 Green Tiger Barbs who wouldn't play nice in the community tank, some shrimp who managed to avoid being captured during the big move, and of course a healthy bunch of snails. So join me as I attempt a full rebuild and to breathe life back into this old tank. I began with doing research. I wanted to make sure I had all the correct information for building the tank for Tiger Barbs, and once that was done I moved on to the tank. The first step of course was a full breakdown of the tank. Everything would need to come out. Loose plant material followed by the filter and the heaters were first. The Tiger Barbs were removed and placed into a temporary holding pen until their new home was ready. I decided to drain and empty the tank more before attempting to capture the shrimp. The tank was drained down to a manageable level, something that still gave enough room for the shrimp to move around in, but made it easy for me to remove all the remaining ornaments and logs. The shrimp were quickly running out of places to hide. I attempted to remove one of the plants, only to discover that over the past year or so, it has spent its time growing and its roots ran pretty deep. So I decided to leave it in for now and moved on to removing the other items in the tank. Finally, with nowhere left to run, the shrimp were cornered and captured and sent to their new tank. Before draining the tank fully, I removed the smaller of the plants, but even the root system on this had grown quite large. With the last of the water finally drained and removed, I could turn my attention to digging out this plant. You can see from the top down view, all the little offshoots are all interconnected by roots to the main plant. A little excavation later and the plant was ready to be removed. These roots were quite impressive. With all the ornaments and plants taken out, the substrate was all that was left. Made up of stones, pebbles and soil, it was quite a mess. I removed it all and stored it away for later. I gave the tank a quick hose down and was ready for a proper deep clean. I spread it down with a solution of vinegar and water. This removed any stubborn stains or marks on the glass, and then it was just a bit of elbow grease and a cloth. The end result was a clean, clear tank ready for a good aquascape. Knowing that I planned to use a number of stones in this tank, I decided to use some egg crate on the base to protect the glass from any damage. I had the idea to use substrate bags to provide a height map to the aquarium. I took the old substrate and placed it in the cheesecloth, bundled this up and placed it into the bottom of the aquarium. These would serve 2 good purposes. 1, they provide a good growing ground for the plants, and 2, provide different heights for me to build off. Before I filled the tank any further, I wanted to put frosted glass on the back of it. So I sprayed it down with water, cut the frosted glass to size, and placed it on the tank. This is a great method to help hide any wires or cables that have to run down the back of the tank. With the basics in place, it was time to get a new substrate down. I decided to use sand for this one, as it fit more of the theme I had planned. I simply poured the sand into the tank, covering the substrate bags to create more height, while keeping the middle lower to create something similar to a valley. Once I had a good inch or 2 of sand in place, I needed to sculpt it more. I moved the sand around, creating more height onto the new formed hills and keeping the front lower. The idea was forming in my mind of the hills being rocky outcrops, while the center valley would be a nice clear run. As for these rocky outcrops, I had a good selection of rocks to pick from. The only problem I had is I wasn't quite sure how I wanted them set up. I did know I wanted height to be a factor. Some were going to be built into tower-like structures, while others would form some sort of rock wall. Again and again and again and again, I tried different ways of adding rocks. Each time I tried, I just wasn't quite happy with how it looked. But all these iterations did give me some idea of how I wanted it laid out. The taller rocks would be off to the right hand side, while the rock wall would be to the back left. If done right, it would almost look like a bit of an underwater canyon. Eventually, after many iterations and retries, I came up with this. Multi-layered stone was epoxied together to create these towers on the right hand side, while on the left the flat edges created a nice crumbling canyon wall look, which would give plenty of gaps and areas for fish to hide and plants to grow. This gap in the rock wall seemed like a perfect place for a tree branch. Adding this and then supergluing some more twigs in created the looks of roots running throughout the wall. With the substrate and the rocks in place, the next step was the plants. Again, I wanted to split the tank into two separate sides. On the left side, I would use red plants, ones with good bright red leaves, and on the right, bright green plants. The plants I chose were a New Zealand grass plant, an AR, a Hermione red sword, a Crypt Wendy green, and a water star. I planted them in and around the rocks. I wanted to again keep the center area clear. While at this stage they may be hidden behind the rocks, over time they will eventually grow and show off the bright colours. For some added decoration and a bit more life to the dead tree, I superglued some flame moss to the length of the tree. I hoped as it grew in and really developed, it would start to look a bit like leaves. I used some of the moss to fill in some of the cracks in the rocks. I really wanted to have it look like it was overgrown and living. Finally, it came time to fill it full of water. This would be its first real test. Hopefully, everything would stay where it's meant to be. I placed down a plastic cup just to make sure I didn't kick up too much sand and really disturb the ground. But slowly, bit by bit, it filled up and everything stayed where it was meant to be. Well, with the exception of some moss who made a run for it. Filling the tank, it kicked up a lot of dirt and debris and some loose sand. But I just skimmed off the top and just left the tank to settle. There was a lot of air in the sand that needed to be released. Some of the plants underwent a process called leaf melt. You can see it on the plant to the front right. While this process looks bad, it's actually perfectly normal for a plant to go through it when they're added to a new water condition. They melt off their old leaves and grow new ones. I wanted to cover up the epoxy I'd used to stick the stones together in building these towers. For this, I turned to Christmas moss. With a bit of super glue, I was able to stick it directly to the epoxy, easily covering it. I also added some to the top just to give it more depth than just being perfectly flat. I tried adding some Java moss into the sand. The hope would be that it would grow into like a bed across the valley floor. Unfortunately, I found it kind of just started breaking up and eventually just floated around. No crumbling rock wall is complete without, well, crumbling rocks. So I broke up one of the spare pieces of rock I had and used it as scatter pieces around the base of the wall. And with that, there was nothing else to do but wait. The tank needed to settle and establish itself for a couple of weeks before I could add the fish. 3 weeks later, the tank's parameters had stabilised and it was ready for fish. First up was 10 new Green Tiger Barbs, quickly joined by the 4 original Tiger Barbs. With Tiger Barbs, you generally want to keep the number above 12. This way it avoids any infighting and allows these smaller and weaker ones to hide within the group. Up next, to add a bit of variety to the aquarium, 4 Coradoras or Cora catfish. These fish are generally bottom feeders and love to sift through sand, which will help clean up any debris in the sand and keep it fresh. And generally they like to stay in open areas, so they're a nice fish to watch. And the final fish we're adding is a rubber-nosed pelco. This guy's been living in a community tank with another pelco for the past year or so it's about time he got his own space. Pelcos mostly come out at night.
Mostly.
So he should be safe from any issues with the Green Tiger Barb. And that's it for all the fish. I do have a cleanup crew coming later in the form of snails, but for now, we're just going to let the fish acclimatise and get used to their new home. The Tiger Barbs are working well together already schooling and moving around as a group. With this group size and there being plenty places for other fish to hide, there should be little chance of aggression from the Tiger Barbs. But I'll keep an eye on it over the next while. Finally, I added in the cleanup crew in the form of zebra snails. These guys will help clean up the algae and devour any extra food that gets left lying around. And hopefully with their shells, they won't be at risk from being nibbled by curious Tiger Barbs. If you've stuck with me this far, let me thank you for watching this video. This has been my first real attempt at trying the Aquascape anything, and while it did turn out okay, I certainly have a lot to learn. So I appreciate any of your thoughts, advice, or even comments. Just let me know down below. I do have plans for the future and your support is most welcome. So once again, thank you for watching that video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me here, and I'll see you all next time.